Way back in the spring of 1990, 10-year-old me was given a $5 allowance. In search of something to spend my money on, I came upon something fantastic at my local convenience store newsstand. It was then that I started a lifelong obsession with the gold standard of sequential art, the comic book. Now, as an old man, I have decided to open up some old boxes and dig into my comic book collection. I decided it's time for me to review and analyze the illustrations and artists that made me comics crazy. What's good, everybody? This is Chris Crazy House, and I want to welcome you to an all-new episode of Chris Crazy House Presents Comics Crazy. Today, we're going to be looking at a classic comic from the late 80s, Mephisto versus the Fantastic Four. So this one comes from a collected miniseries where the character Mephisto, who's kind of like Marvel Comics version of the devil or Satan, and how he was manipulating and fighting all these different super teams in the Marvel Universe. And it started out with issue 1 where he's taking on the Fantastic Four. I'm a big fan of the Fantastic Four, and I always enjoyed their stories. I always enjoyed the fact that they weren't just your typical superhero team, that they were more of explorers or adventurers or scientists. So it was more like a sci-fi story, not just a superhero type story. So we're going to be taking a look at this, and I don't know who did this cover. If anyone knows who did the cover for this particular book, I would appreciate if you would, put it in the comment section. I see a signature here. It says, looks like it says Bolton 86. But I'm not exactly sure who that might be. So let me know who did this cover. But I want to say I do enjoy the look of this cover. It's very haunting. The fact that we have, Mephisto kind of standing triumphant over the Fantastic Four. And you see all 4 members of them kind of like burning in the hellfire here. So very creepy image. And I like the fact that it's lit from the bottom. So you see the lava and the hellfire is what's actually lighting all these characters from the bottom. So if you ever want to create maybe like a creepy or maybe a scary type atmosphere, light it from the bottom. I think that works a lot, and put heavy shadows on top. But very cool cover, and it sets up what happens in this issue where Mephisto winds up taking all 4 members of the Fantastic Four down to hell with him. So let's take a look here. We're going to open it up, and this story is written by Al Milgrom. It is drawn by one of my favorite artists of all time, John Buscema, and it is inked by Bob Wiseck. And the title of the story is Give the Devil His Due. And that's exactly what's happening here. Is the devil, Mephisto, is coming to collect his due. And we open up here on this splash page, and not that spectacular of a splash page, but very well drawn by John Buscema. And it's the Fantastic Four investigating what's in the sub-basement of their newly built Four Freedoms Plaza. So the Fantastic Four have moved kind of out of the Baxter building, and they built their own new base called the Four Freedoms Plaza. And they're down in the sub-basement because Reed Richards does not remember designing this part of the structure, and he's wondering where this weird tunnel has come from at the bottom of their sub-basement. And you see here, a great view of Reed stretching down into the hole to see what's down here. Oh, and just to mention, at this time, the She-Hulk was also a member of the Fantastic Four, because for a while the Thing was off on Battle World during the Secret Wars, and the She-Hulk took his place for a while as the muscle of the team. As the Fantastic Four are investigating the sub-basement, we see Reed Richards and Sue Storm's son, Franklin Richards. He's just waking up from a nightmare. And Franklin Richards is actually one of the more powerful characters in the Marvel Universe, based on his parents both being powered by cosmic rays. So when they got together and had a child, they created one of the most powerful beings in the Marvel Universe. And Franklin being probably one of the most powerful mutants in the Marvel Universe. So as Reed is down there, stretched out, investigating the subtunnel, he notices there's like a fire going on down there, and he pulls out real quick before the fire comes out like a geyser. And as Johnny Storm, he tries to absorb it because that's his powers as the Human Torch. He can control fire as well. He tries to absorb that fire, but in doing so, it winds up snuffing out his own fire. And it's so hot that it winds up melting the opening to the subtunnel. And, you know, they're kind of concerned about what that was in particular. Like they said that was no normal fire. It wasn't something that was created by chemicals or whatever. And they can't investigate it at this point because now the tunnel is sealed off. But at this point, they decide to go discuss it. And at that time is when Franklin comes to tell his parents about the nightmare he just had. And Franklin's been worried. He said the bad man tried to kill him in his nightmare. And the bad man he's talking about is Mephisto. You have a tender moment here of Reed actually taking his son back to bed and tucking him in and kind of trying to reassure him that everything's okay and that was just a nightmare. And then the group go and discuss, you know, not just what just happened in the sub-basement, but also Franklin's dream, because Franklin is so powerful, they surmise that he might actually be right about a threat coming their way. You know, they said that his dreams have come true before, so maybe they should take heed and listen to what he has to say about this. So we cut to the next day, and we get to Franklin waking up and going downstairs to have some breakfast. His mom's in there making breakfast, and she tells him he needs to go brush his teeth first, and he's going to be under the supervision of his Uncle Ben. The Thing is going to be doing the supervision for the brushing of the teeth. And I always thought that, you know, as far as uncles could go, I would think the Thing would be a cool uncle to have. He just seems like a very fun character and would probably be really good with children. Outside of the bathroom here, while Franklin was supposed to be brushing his teeth, we see that Johnny Storm and Alicia Masters are tonguing each other down. And Ben basically tells them, you know, there's a child present. You might want to cool it down, cool your jets. So let me explain this before we get any further into this story here. At this point, because like I said before, Ben Grimm was actually on the Battle World during the Secret Wars, and he decided to stay there because he could actually change back and forth between the Thing and Ben Grimm. And so when he left, Alicia Masters was there by herself. So when Johnny Storm and Reed Richards came back from the Battle World, Johnny Storm and Alicia Masters started dating each other because they thought that Ben was never going to come back. And he did wind up coming back, but now Johnny Storm and Alicia are together. And, you know, now they are together. Ben kind of accepts it, but he doesn't really like it. And he's telling him to cool out on the kissing because there's a kid present. And they turn around and basically say that that's the reason why she left Ben, because he's just a jealous monster, and talking about how ugly he is. And that pisses Ben off something fierce. And he says his famous line is clobbering time. He tries to actually go ahead and punch Johnny Storm. And I love the way that John Buscema draws his figures. I love the way he draws a lot of the facial expressions. Like you see a very sly and devilish look in Johnny Storm's face here. And, the action sequences are drawn very well. You got a great idea of how Ben Grimm is trying to knock Johnny's block off. He's tearing up the furniture, and he's telling Johnny Storm to go ahead and flame on, so that way it'll make it a fair fight. And he even punches a hole through the wall of the actual building. You see his fist coming out and the city out in the background. So Franklin is scared right now, and he runs to go get his parents to stop Ben and Johnny from fighting. And right here on this page, Ben actually does get a hold of Johnny Storm, and he's grabbing him very tightly, and he grabs him so tight that Johnny literally disintegrates in his hands. And Ben is wondering, like, what happened. He didn't realize how tight he was holding him, and now he's scared that he's actually killed Johnny. And right then and there, Alicia turns to him and calls him a monster. Says, "We were right about you. You're evil, evil." And she tells him there's only one place that evil people go. And then both Alicia and Ben vanish in a flash of light. So we learn very quickly that this is all a trick by Mephisto. He wants the members of the Fantastic Four to think that they've committed the ultimate evil act. And in that way, he can have the right to take them down to hell. So we cut to the next scene, and we're at a tennis match where Johnny Storm and Alicia Masters are watching a tennis match. And, Alicia Masters is blind, so Johnny Storm is kind of trying to give her, the blow-by-blow about what's happening during the tennis match. And one of the tennis players actually gets pissed off by this and tells Johnny Storm to shut up. And Johnny Storm's trying to explain to the guy, he's like, I'm trying to explain the match to my girl. She's blind, don't make a big deal out of it. So the tennis player gets very rude and says, you know what? I already got a deal with these blind ass referees. Now I got a deal with blind spectators too. So I take that chick out of here and go get her a CNI dog or something. Which is pretty cold-blooded. I actually enjoy this panel a lot. I think it's actually pretty funny. When the first time I read it, I thought it was pretty cold-blooded that he would actually go out of his way to diss a blind girl like that. But of course, someone who doesn't find this funny is Johnny Storm himself. He gets so mad, in fact, that he flames on right there in the middle of the stands with all these innocent bystanders there and winds up burning all of them. And we realize right then and there at this point that Johnny Storm has just basically killed a whole bunch of innocent people because he let his rage get the best of him. And the tennis player is basically telling him, like, you know what? You killed all those people. That's a terrible sin. And you're a sinner. And we all know where sinners go. And right then, in a flash of light, Johnny Storm is taken to hell by Mephisto. So he's so far 2 for 2. Mephisto has tricked Ben Grimm into committing a dangerous act, or at least thinking he has, and has taken him down to hell. And now he's done the same to Johnny Storm. And we see here, in reality, Alicia Masters is basically just sitting there. She doesn't know what's happened. The people around them don't know what's happened either. It looks like Johnny Storm has just basically disappeared from the stands of watching the tennis match. So now we cut back to Four Freedoms Plaza, and we find Franklin. He's still worried about, he still thinks Johnny Storm and Ben Grimm are having a fight back in the hallway by the bathroom. And he goes to tell his dad what's going on. And we see Mr. Fantastic here with Mr. Willie Lumpkin, one of the famous mailmen from the Marvel Universe. He's been there all the time. I think Stan Lee actually does do a cameo as Willie Lumpkin in the MCU. But Willie Lumpkin is known for delivering mail to the Fantastic Four. He's also known for dating Aunt May. So he's been all over the Marvel Universe. He's one of the few regular human characters that makes a lot of appearances in different comic books within the Marvel Universe. But here he is delivering some mail to Mr. Fantastic, and Franklin tries to interrupt him and lets him know that, Johnny and Ben are fighting. But, Reed doesn't pay too much attention to it because the way he figures it, Ben and Johnny are always fighting. So that's kind of like a regular occurrence with those two, so he's not paying too much attention to it. Franklin's trying to tell him this is more severe. This is something else going on here. And when doing so, Mr. Fantastic is checking this, just this sack that Willie Lumpkin has, showed here, that there's a, just a sack of mail just sitting around. And as Mr. Fantastic is checking it, digs his hand in there, a whole bunch of fire comes out of the sack. And in a flash of smoke, that's when Mr. Fantastic is taken to hell. So it turns out Willie Lumpkin is really Mephisto in disguise here. And you can see a very evil looking face here and him kind of laughing in an evil way. It kind of looks like the bad guy from Phantasm or something like that. Those creepy old men from those old classic horror movies. That's what he kind of reminds me of here, like Vincent Price or something. And, Franklin being a little kid right here, of course, he's scared to death. And he runs into the kitchen to tell his mom and the She-Hulk, who are still in there making breakfast. And Franklin runs in there and says, "Mommy, Daddy just got killed. He got burnt up." And he said, "Willie Lumpkin, the mailman, is the one who killed him." And his mom's like, "Franklin, what are you talking about? Why would you think Willie Lumpkin would hurt your dad? Especially like the way that he got tricked into being zapped to hell was the fact that he was tampering with the mail." I thought that was a funny touch by Mephisto. He couldn't get Reed to commit a real sin, so he said he was tampering with the mail, which is against the law, so that counts to be taken to hell. But Sue Storm is kind of saying, like, she thinks her son is just kind of exaggerating, and she accidentally knocks over some cooking oil onto the fire, onto the stove, causes a big flame, and poof, she gets taken to hell. And now Franklin's worried. He's like, now Mommy too? So he runs to the She-Hulk to get a hug and be comforted by his Aunt Jen. And then we find out that she is also Mephisto in disguise. And she says that, you know what, we couldn't get your mom on anything else, but being careless is a sin. That's close enough to being a sin, so that's how we were able to zap her down to hell. And we see this very evil look on She-Hulk's face here. I like that. Once again, I love the way John Buscema draws his facial expressions. I've always enjoyed that. I've always tried to imitate it as well in my own artwork. So She-Hulk lifts Franklin over her head. The ground begins to crack open, and she tosses him down into perdition. So Franklin is now falling down into this netherworld or hellscape that we see here. I love the way that this is drawn. It's very scary and creepy. And I can imagine for a child, it's probably like 10 times more scary. Just the fact that he's falling like this, the fact that he's falling through this crack. And you see all these monsters and weird landscapes and things trying to reach out for him and grab him with their claws. And that's when Franklin finally lands right there in the middle. And we get this great splash page of Franklin landing there and Mephisto on his throne. And the other members of the Fantastic Four stuck in like this rock-like substance. And we got the demons and other stuff kind of roaming in the background. Very well done splash page. I really like this. This is actually a better splash page than the one we saw earlier at the beginning of this book. But I guess they couldn't have this at the beginning, obviously. They had to save this for, the middle section and just give us a reveal that it's Mephisto that's been manipulating all these circumstances to get the Fantastic Four down here into his domain, where he is in complete control. And he kind of gives a half-assed reasoning why he's brought them there, and that's because Franklin was the last person to defeat him with his psychic powers and kind of sent Mephisto back to hell. And so he's kind of here, I guess, basically for revenge. But what he wants is Franklin's soul. And the other members of the Fantastic Four, obviously, they're saying they're not going to have it. Mephisto kind of gives them a little bit of a bargaining document saying that, well, if one of you will exchange your souls, I won't take his. You guys, if one of you decides to stay, I'll let him go. The thing is like, the hell with that. Franklin's innocent and it's clobbering time. So the thing literally busts out of his bonds here, being stuck in this little rocky contraption, he breaks out of there and tries to fight Mephisto one-on-one. And as he's trying to do this, Mephisto starts to grow into a giant, but you know, the Thing is not scared by that. He said he's fought giants before, he's fought bigger opponents before, but we have to remember this is Mephisto's domain, and here he can do basically whatever he wants. So he literally picks up the Thing and starts peeling off his rocky skin. And this is actually pretty disturbing. I remember reading this as a youngin' and thinking just how disturbing this was. Now, I think, you know, in order to get around the comics code, they couldn't go ahead and show, you know, the things like muscle structure and blood and guts and stuff when he's getting his skin peeled off. So they kind of went with this ghastly looking, ghostly, white type skin. And basically what's happening here is they're saying that, you know, the Thing is monster looking on the outside, and now that Mephisto has peeled off his skin, he's a monster on the inside as well. And you can see he's kind of holding his hands over his face because he's ashamed of the way that he looks. And that's basically a way of torturing Ben Grimm, because that's his greatest fear, is that people are scared of him and he's fearsome looking, not just on the outside, but on the inside as well. And you can see the other members of the Fantastic Four kind of looking on in horror and are sad that the Thing or Ben is being tortured in this way. So this actually gets Johnny Storm heated to the point where he breaks out of his containment as well, and he tries to go and fight Mephisto with his fire. And he doesn't seem to realize that if Mephisto is the lord of this hellscape, that fire is definitely not one of the things that's going to hurt him. And even though Johnny Storm is extremely powerful with his, you know, fire powers and all, it's not doing anything to Mephisto. And Mephisto kind of zaps him into this lake of fire. And he's kind of stuck in there with all these other tormented souls. Another very disturbing scene in this book. You know, first we have poor Ben getting his skin peeled off. Now we got Johnny Storm stuck in literally a lake of hellfire, burning with all these other tormented and tortured souls. So now we finally get to Reed Richards, and he's trying to basically, you know, figure out a way to get him and his family out of this situation. And Mephisto comes to him and says, you know what? You already signed a bargain with me. And Reed's like, that's impossible. Like, he doesn't even remember anything like that. But Mephisto takes Reed back to back when he was back in university, when him and Dr. Doom were roommates. And we all know that Dr. Doom was trying to save his mother from Mephisto because his mother was a witch and had been taken to hell. And one of the very first big inventions that Dr. Doom made was trying to break through the dimensional barrier so that he could go rescue his mother. But Reed Richards noticed that, you know, Doom's calculations for this new machine were a little off, and he's worried that something bad was going to happen to Doom. But, you know, Doom, being the arrogant individual that he is, told Reed to get out of there, and Reed left, and Doom's experiment literally blew up in his face. And that's why Dr. Doom wears that armor, because he's disfigured by this experiment. So when Reed Richards came back into the college room, to the dorm, to find out where Doom was, that's when Mephisto appeared. And he told Reed Richards, you know what? If you sign this bargain, I will give you the greatest intelligence on Earth. So now we're led to believe by Mephisto that the reason Reed Richards is so smart is because he signed an agreement with Mephisto. And Reed is kind of trying to think this over. He's like, I don't remember this at all. He's like, you gotta be bluffing. But Mephisto basically tells him, like, you know what? I gave you your intelligence. I can take it back. And he grabs Reed by the head and basically takes away the super intelligence that Reed Richards has. And poor Reed is sitting here looking like someone who just fell off the short bus, basically. And that's finally when Sue Storm breaks out of her containment and she's trying to shake Reed and trying to figure out what happened to him, but he's just like pretty much incoherent. Like, that's how much intelligence was sucked away from poor Reed Richards, that he doesn't even have the intelligence to speak or acknowledge his own wife anymore. So at this point, Sue Storm is pissed. She's really pissed because she, unleashes her invisible beams at Mephisto. And once again, we got a great facial expression drawn by John Buscema. Once again, I love how he draws his facial expressions, whether the character is angry, happy, or whatever. He does an amazing job with just very simple line work of creating great facial expressions. And she's been hitting Mephisto with her invisible power so hard that even he wants to, say that, I give up, enough. And he basically says that he'll restore Reed's intelligence and he'll let Sue's family go. All she has to do is sign her soul over to him. And she agrees. She agrees to do so because Sue is the mother. She's the matriarch of the Fantastic Four. She'll do anything to save her family. And she decides to go ahead and do it. And all four of the men and Franklin are zapped back to Earth. And Sue is captured there by the demons. And at this point, that's when we see Mephisto saying that, you know what? I never had any leeway or leverage over you. There was never any bargain. I basically lied just to get your soul. And now he's got her. He basically tricked the entire Fantastic Four to get one of them to sign themselves over. And he wound up getting Sue Storm to sign her soul over to him. And now she's got her lock, stock, and barrel. And the demons are taking poor Sue away. And we see Mephisto laughing maniacally as she's being dragged off. And, we get a little preview here saying that in the next issue, Mephisto will be confronting X-Factor. So that is the end of the Fantastic Four versus Mephisto. A very well done issue of a comic book and a miniseries done by, like I said, one of my favorite artists of all time, John Buscema. And like I said, I enjoyed this book a lot. It had great artwork, but also had some very disturbing moments as well. And I think they did a great job with creating the horror atmosphere in this book without being over the top with like gore or being overly gratuitous. They were able to create a creepy and horrifying atmosphere, with scenes like, the characters' faces kind of getting evil looking, or with the Fantastic Four being zapped down to hell, or, with scenes like, the Thing getting his skin peeled off, or Johnny Storm being thrown into a lake of fire. They really did an amazing job with creating basically a horror style comic within the confines of a superhero book. And, we still got the comics code at this point, so they couldn't be too violent or too gory, but they did an amazing job with still keeping a very tight story and keeping it in the realm of like horror or very creepy. And it gets no more creepy than the character of Mephisto. I'm actually surprised books like this got published, because the parents and stuff out there, they're very tight on, what type of content their children will look at or read. And having the superheroes fight a character who's literally like the manifestation of the devil or Satan, I'm sure that was something that they might have been worried that the censors were going to get a hold of. But you folks can let me know what you thought of Mephisto versus the Fantastic Four. I've always enjoyed this issue. You can tell that it's well worn. I've had this one for a while. I actually bought this out of one of the comic book bins, so I didn't buy it when it was new. I bought it, a used copy out of the comic book bin. I found it in there and decided to buy it because I loved the way the cover looked. But, you guys can let me know if you like it, if you enjoyed this issue and you want to save yourself from the hellfire. Go ahead and hit that like button. Go ahead and subscribe to Chris Crazy House, and make sure you go watch some of those other episodes of Comics Crazy that are on my channel. Anyway, folks, I will be back with some more comics and some more pop culture nostalgia in the next episode, and I hope you stick with me. Anyway, Chris Crazy House signing out. Peace.